Jesus' confrontations with religious leaders. Flash of visions. Dear listeners, imagine yourself once again in the streets of Jerusalem. Few days after Jesus' triumphal entry, the initial euphoria has given way to palpable tension. Jesus, far from conforming to the expectations of a conquering Messiah, continues to multiply provocative actions and words. The religious authorities, already suspicious, are now openly hostile. Today, we'll explore the confrontations between Jesus and the religious leaders of his time. These exchanges, often bitter and charged with tension, are not mere theological quarrels. They reveal a profound conflict over the very nature of religion, spiritual authority, and the relationship between God and man. Prepare yourself for a fascinating journey into the heart of these debates that have shaped Christianity and continue to challenge us today. To understand the scope of these confrontations, we must first grasp the religious context, time. First-century Judaism was dominated by several influential groups. Pharisees. Respected for their piety and deep knowledge of the law, they sought to apply God's commandments in all aspects of daily life. The Sadducees. Primarily from the priestly aristocracy, they controlled the temple and often collaborated with Roman authorities. The scribes. Experts in interpreting the law, they played a crucial role in teaching and applying religious traditions. These groups, despite their differences, shared a common vision of piety based on strict observance of the law and traditions. Their authority was largely unquestioned among the people. It's in this context that Jesus arrives, proposing a radically different vision of the relationship with God. His teachings and actions challenge not only specific interpretations of the law, but the entire established religious system. One of the most spectacular confrontations occurs when Jesus enters the temple in Jerusalem. What he sees there fills him with indignation. The court of the Gentiles, meant to be a place of prayer for all nations, has been transformed into a noisy marketplace where animals are sold for sacrifices and money is exchanged. Matthew tells us, Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. Imagine the scene. Overturned tables, coins rolling on the ground, animals fleeing, cries of surprise and anger. It's utter chaos. This action by Jesus is highly symbolic and deeply provocative. It questions the authority of the priests who allowed and probably profited from this commerce in the temple. It denounces the corruption of a religious system that exploits people's piety for financial gain. It affirms a new understanding of the temple and worship, centered on prayer and direct relationship with God, rather than on external rituals. It foreshadows God's judgment on a corrupt religious system and announces the establishment of a new temple in the person of Jesus himself. The authorities' reaction is swift. Matthew tells us, but when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did and the children shouting in the temple courts, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. This action by Jesus is perceived as a direct threat to their authority and the established order. It's the beginning of a series of confrontations that will intensify over the days to come. The day after the cleansing of the temple, chief priests and the elders of the people come to confront Jesus. By what authority are you doing these things, they ask. And who gave you this authority? This question goes straight to the heart of the conflict. The religious authorities derive their legitimacy from their institutional position and traditional training. Jesus, however, acts with an authority that seems to come directly from God without going through official channels. Jesus' response is brilliant. He asks them a counter-question. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or of human origin? This question puts his adversaries in an awkward position. They acknowledge the divine origin of John's ministry. They will have to recognize that of Jesus as well. If they deny it, they risk alienating the people who considered John a prophet. Unable to answer, they say, we don't know. Jesus then concludes, neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. This response from Jesus is not a mere evasion. It highlights the hypocrisy of his adversaries, who refuse to recognize God's work. when it manifests outside their established structures. Jesus doesn't just respond to his adversaries' questions, he goes on the offensive by telling a series of parables that denounce the attitude of the religious leaders and announce coming judgment. Parable of the Two Sons, Matthew 21:28-32, contrasts the apparent obedience of the religious leaders with the real obedience of repentant sinners. Jesus concludes by telling the religious leaders, "Truly, I tell you, tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you." The parable of the tenants, Matthew 21:33-46, is even more direct. It depicts the religious leaders as unfaithful stewards, who refuse to give God what is due to him, and who go so far as to kill the son of the vineyard owner. Jesus concludes by quoting Psalm 118, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." He thus identifies himself as the rejected stone and announces that the kingdom of God will be given to a people who will produce its fruit. These parables are a severe warning. They announce that those who believe themselves to be the exclusive guardians of God's truth risk completely missing his work. They invite a radical humility and openness to God's unexpected action. Jesus' adversaries, seeing that they cannot catch him out openly, try to trap him with difficult questions. Each of these questions is carefully designed to put Jesus in an awkward position, regardless of his answer. Question about paying taxes to Caesar, Matthew 22:15-22. Pharisees and Herodians ask Jesus if it is lawful to pay taxes to Caesar. If he answers yes, he risks losing the support of the people who hate Roman occupation. If he answers no, he can be accused of sedition. Jesus' answer is masterful. So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. He thus affirms both civic duties and the ultimate sovereignty of God. Question about the resurrection. Matthew 22:23-33. The Sadducees, who don't believe in the resurrection, pose a hypothetical question to Jesus about marriage in the afterlife. Jesus responds by showing that their question is based on a misunderstanding of the nature of life after the resurrection. He affirms the reality of the resurrection by quoting Exodus, "I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living." Question about the greatest commandment, Matthew 22:34-40. An expert in the law asks Jesus which is the greatest commandment. Jesus responds by quoting the Shema Israel, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind." But he immediately adds a second commandment, "Love your neighbor as yourself." He thus affirms that love for God and love for neighbor are inseparable. In each of these confrontations, Jesus demonstrates not only his wisdom, but also his ability to go to the heart of the questions, beyond theological disputes, to reveal the true nature of God and his will for humanity. The tension reaches its peak when Jesus pronounces a series of woes against the scribes and Pharisees, Matthew 23. It's a scathing indictment against religious hypocrisy and the abuse of spiritual authority. Jesus denounces hypocrisy. They do not practice what they preach. Spiritual pride. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. Legalism. You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Attention to outward appearances rather than inner purity. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. This discourse is surprisingly harsh coming from Jesus. It reveals how seriously he takes the abuse of spiritual authority and the danger of transforming religion into a system of oppression rather than a path of liberation. But even in this severe discourse, Jesus' love shines through. He concludes with a poignant lament over Jerusalem. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing." These confrontations between Jesus and the religious leaders of his time are not simply historical debates. They raise questions that remain deeply relevant for us today. The nature of spiritual authority. Where does spiritual authority come from? How can we discern true spiritual authority from its counterfeit? The danger of legalism. How can we remain faithful to our convictions without falling into a narrow legalism that loses sight of the essential? Religious hypocrisy. How can we cultivate a spiritual authenticity that aligns our actions with our beliefs? The role of religion in society. How can faith be a force for positive transformation without becoming a tool of oppression or division? Openness to God's unexpected action. Are we ready to recognize God's work even when it manifests in surprising ways or outside our established structure? Prophetic courage. How can we, like Jesus, have the courage to denounce injustice and hypocrisy, even when it is personally costly? Compassion in confrontation. How can we confront error and injustice while maintaining a spirit of love and compassion? These confrontations invite us to deep reflection on our own spiritual life and how we practice our faith. They call us to radical authenticity, constant humility, and continuous openness to God's action in our life and in the world. Let's take a moment to reflect personally on these teachings. I invite you to meditate on these questions. Are there areas in your spiritual life where you risk falling into the trap of legalism or hypocrisy? How do you react to expressions of faith that are different from what you're used to? Are you open to the idea that God might act in unexpected ways? To what extent is your religious practice centered on outward appearances rather than inner transformation? Are there situations in your life where you are called to have the courage to stand up against injustice or hypocrisy? How can you cultivate a spiritual authority based on authenticity and service rather than power and control? Jesus' confrontations with the religious leaders have had a profound and lasting impact on the development of Christianity. They laid the foundation for a religion centered on grace rather than law, on inner transformation rather than outward conformity. Throughout the history of the Church, these confrontations have served as a point of reference for reform movement. From the Church Fathers to the Protestant reformers, through medieval mystics and modern revolutionaries, Jesus' words have continued to challenge ossified religious structures and call for a return to the essence of the gospel. Even today, these confrontations invite us to continuous reform, both personal and institutional. They remind us that true religion is not a series of empty rituals or rigid doctrines, but a living relationship with God that manifests itself through love and justice. Dear friends, as we conclude our exploration of the confrontations between Jesus and the religious leaders, let's remember that these exchanges are not simply theological debates of the past. They are a vibrant call to an authentic and transformative faith. Jesus invites us to a religion of the heart, faith that goes beyond appearances to touch the very essence of our being. He calls us to a relationship with God based not on fear or obligation, but on love and grace. These confrontations challenge us to constantly seek authenticity in our spiritual life, to be open to God's unexpected action, to have the courage to question structures and practices that do not reflect God's love and justice, to cultivate a humility that recognizes our constant need for God's grace. May Jesus' provocative words continue to resonate in our hearts and communities. May they push us towards a deeper, more authentic, more transformative faith. May they remind us that the heart of the gospel is not a rigid religion, but a living relationship with a God of love who desires our good, that of all humanity. May we, like Jesus, have the courage to confront hypocrisy and injustice while manifesting the love and compassion that are at the heart of the gospel message. May our faith not just be a series of beliefs or practices, a living force that transforms our lives and our world. As we leave this reflection on Jesus' confrontations, may we depart with a renewed commitment to live an authentic, courageous, and transformative faith. May we, like Jesus, be agents of renewal and reform, bringing the light of the gospel into all aspects of our life and society.